So Berkeley's tried to convince us already that heat isn't actually in fire and pain isn't actually in a pin. Similar, he wants to convince us that tastes and odors aren't out there in the world; they're all in our heads. So we've already seen that sugar may not be actually sweet, and cilantro might not actually have a one set taste because it tastes differently to us. Well, another example Berkeley might like would be miracle fruit. This is a fruit that once you eat it, makes really bitter things taste incredibly sweet and really pleasant. He would say that, well, if you can do this, then it means that those bitter things aren't actually bitter, right? They just sort of have some property that makes us taste a certain way, right? So the actual taste is just all in our heads. And smell, he's going to say, will work the exact same way. Next, we want to move on to sound. So Berkeley wants to know, does sound exist in a bell, a ringing bell, for example, or is it like pain in a pin, or heat in a fire, or sweetness in sugar? It's all actually in our heads. Well, first of all, he wants to say that sound needs a medium. So of course it can't be in a bell, because if you ring a bell when there's no air, or nothing to carry the sound, well, there's no sound at all, right? So the sound can't just be in stuff. We know sound comes from the motion of the medium, usually the motion of air. So is the sound in the motion, or is it in us? Well, he's going to say motion is just motion, right? It's only sound when we hear it. Motion is just stuff moving. That's maybe that's out there in the world. He's going to argue later that it's not. But motion isn't sound, right? We saw this argument a little bit last week with Locke, the tree falling in a forest example. So sounds, Berkeley will say, aren't out there in the world. It's just sound is the experience, the human, mindful experience of hearing something. And if there's no mind, you're not going to experience a sound, right? Things might move, but there's no sound. He wants to go on now to color. Remember, colors are secondary qualities for Locke. We've already seen this argument before. So he wants to say, are colors really in objects? Well, no, right? Things look differently, he says, at different levels of scrutiny. So if I have got this yellow legal pad in front of me, and it looks pretty consistently yellow to me right now, but if I looked at it under a magnifying glass or under a microscope, then maybe it wouldn't look entirely yellow, right? There'd probably be some brown, some blue, who knows, right? Paper dye is a funny thing, so it would look a whole bunch of different colors. So which are the real colors, right? Is it the yellow that I see right now? Is it the whole slew of colors under the microscope? There's no way to judge. Further, right, we know that color also needs a medium, and so in the same way that sound needs air or some other medium, color needs light, right? So the color can't be in stuff, because if there's no light to carry it, then it wouldn't be there at all. So colors are going to work a lot like sounds for Berkeley. He says they're not out there in the world either. So Berkeley thinks he's shown pretty conclusively that at least the secondary qualities are only all in our heads, and this is basically Locke's same point. Was he successful? Well, some of his arguments are better than others, so we might talk about these in the forums. Now, though, he wants to say that he's going to contrast with Locke. He's going to say, sure, the secondary qualities are all in our heads, but Locke wants to say the primary qualities, the really important ones, those are out there in the world. Berkeley says, not so fast, Locke. That's not actually true. He wants to show that the primary qualities are also all in our heads, and if he can prove this, then there's nothing left out, right? He's shown that all the secondary qualities are in our heads, all the primary qualities are in our heads, so there's nothing that's not all in our heads. There's nothing actually out there in the world. There's only ideas in minds. This is a tough project. We'll see if he can do it. So he wants to talk about extension, which we've roughly called size, right? It's a sort of a quality of taking up space. So think about a primary quality like size. We're tempted to say that things have an absolute size, right? So picture something that's 8 inches long. That's the short width of a piece of paper, so like an envelope, say. But we know that our sense experiences of things aren't very consistent, right? Our own aren't consistent, not to mention us versus other kinds of creatures. So Berkeley brings up this example of a mite. He says a mite, which is sort of like a flea, it's a little tiny insect, could see an 8-inch envelope as the hugest thing it's ever encountered, right? We see it as, yeah, it's sort of medium-sized, right? It's not massive, it's not tiny. But we can change our own circumstances, too, to make this look different. So if we're really far away, right, if I look out my window and there's somebody out in the yard I can see out the window, and they're 100 yards away holding an envelope, that's going to look really tiny, right? On the other hand, if I hold it up an inch in front of my eyes, it's going to look huge. So size might be, Berkeley suggests, like heat and cold in water, right? It's all sort of relative. Maybe there's no absolute size to be found. Because how would we judge which is the real, the correct perception, right? How do we know whether 8 inches is big or small? We don't really have a way to judge. He's going to talk more about extension in a little bit, but we're going to take a little detour first by time and motion, so we'll start that in our next video.